Well, welcome into the True Man Podcast. Okay, I think today's podcast is going to be very informative, despite the fact, it's a given that Razorbacks and Longhorns don't get along very well. But we're gonna, you didn't think I'd let it slide, right? But we're gonna put that rivalry aside for the good of humanity today. So on the show today, welcome Kim and Mike Barnes. Listen, I love it when someone plants a flag and makes a commitment to serve and help. And that's what this couple's done. Many of us have aging parents or in-laws, and many of us are dealing with things like Alzheimer's, dementia in our families. It can be flat out overwhelming. So where do you go for answers? Well, I have a hunch. We're going to find out today. So welcome to the show, Kim and Mike Barnes.
Thank you. Well, flashbacks to the Southwest Conference, right? When you think
Exactly.
about it.
Exactly.
Oh, don't age me. Don't age me. Yeah.
Well, we remember it too. So
And we have a son who's an Aggie, so we go all over the place.
Yeah. Now you're hitting a nerve. Okay. All right. So listen, I really appreciate you guys coming on to talk about the topic of aging and everything that comes with it. So tell us, both of you were in the media, you're pros, and life's just floating along and you're doing what you do, and then life happens, right? And so probably a good starting point right there. So you have aging parents and
How do you deal? Well, as much as you think you're prepared for it, you never are, no matter what happens. In 2021, let's see, moved my mom into memory care. My dad was in the hospital with a bad case of COVID pneumonia, and he had to get a pacemaker, and that wasn't all together. It was all separate. And just going through that, it's like an average year when you're a proverbial caregiver for your aging parents. And again, no matter how prepared you think you are, if you have a great relationship with your parents, like I did, if you have all the legal stuff, will, power of attorney, medical directive, etc., like we did,
the financial situation.
Even financial situation, even if you know everything, when that stuff happens, you're not ready and you need help.
And it can feel so lonely because you feel like, surely I'm the only person going through this right now. And we just don't really talk about it very much. And until you happen to bring it up, it comes up in conversation somehow, and everybody has a story, whether it's a current situation with a parent or an in-law, whether it's what they saw their parents do with their parents, or maybe it's your grandparents, that you've been actively helping with, or an aunt and an uncle, whatever it is. I think that we all have those situations and stories. And mine's a little different because my mom is single. She was remarried, but her husband died several years ago. And so that creates different dynamics because she's by herself.
Yeah.
And she started getting scammed financially. And we've had some other issues. She had to have major eye surgery. She has some memory challenges. So all of those things together, we just don't talk about it. And so it can feel really lonely, which is why we decided to see, hey, I think there's a lot of people that are going through this and might need a place or need other people to talk to that can really understand what you're going through.
Other than Alexa, right? Right. I mean, this is like where we all turn. I mean, I think I told you guys, I was going through a little bit of this. So, my mom was diagnosed with colon cancer a couple of years ago. And like, all of a sudden there's this realization like, oh, well, things, they're not what they were, or maybe they won't be, the way I want them to be. And so there was all this like, well, we've heard rumors about this facility and that facility. And finally, I just put it to bed and went to every facility in the town that I was in so that I could get the information that I needed. It was the only thing I could do was hop in the car and just go someplace and go get it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of people are turning to Google to find these answers, and they might not, surprisingly enough, might not be factual on the internet.
Well, and not even factual as much as you just don't even know what you're searching for. A lot of times that's one of the things that we've discovered is that there are a lot of services and providers out there that are great. It can help you, but as the adult child, you may not know what they're called, that they even exist. Did you know there's a care manager or somebody that can help you with that stuff? Did you know there's like a locator service, like an apartment locator, but for seniors. You know, there's so many of those kinds of help that's out there. You don't know what they are, or that they exist. So you don't even know what to Google. You know, you don't even know what am I supposed to type in?
So what did you guys start with? I mean, what's the starting point for you? I mean, you got all this stuff going on. Like, what do you do?
Well, even for me, as my mom's Alzheimer's was getting worse and worse and worse, and my sister and I talked to my dad and said, Mom's getting bad, and it's getting tougher, not only on her, but it's tough on you as the caretaker, caregiver, taking care of her 24/7. We're going to have to move her into memory care. Well, you Google memory care, and in the city that they live in near Dallas, and things pop up. Yeah. But then when we went to go visit 4 different facilities, we didn't know what to look for. We didn't know what to ask.
And I bet, now I've not been through this, but I bet my hunch is there was a drastic difference between those 4 facilities on top of that. Well,
there was a little bit of a difference, but it was almost apples and oranges. Like, well, I'm not sure.
And what are we supposed to be looking for? What are we looking for?
Right. Yeah. And truthfully, the one that we picked was the one that we had just had a better feel about. And they're the ones where when they said, oh, what's going on with y'all? And my sister started getting a little emotional as she talked about my mom. And one of the caregivers came over and gave her a big hug. Yeah. And it's like, oh, wow, that's such a nice place. Let's move her there.
Right.
Which, no offense, but that's not the reason to move someone into a place, whether it's assisted living or memory care, anything like that. Now, we got lucky because the place my mom is great. She's been there for more than a year, and we got, knock on wood, very, very lucky. But gosh, we were so overwhelmed because we didn't know if we were doing it right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how do you know?
Well, I think that some of it is doing your research. I think some of it does come to that feeling. I think that what you experienced ended up being kind of indicative of the way the culture and the community was where she is. Yeah. So I think it's doing your research, asking around. I think it's having the support of other people that have been through situations. The challenge, though, is that every single situation is slightly different. And whether it's just because of our parents' personalities, our siblings' personalities, the family dynamics that are involved, their financial situation, their preferences, all of those really come into play and can really impact whether you've got somebody who's, a parent that says, I'm not ever leaving my house, or somebody who says, well, I think it sounds kind of fun because there'll be bridge and games to play all the time. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's the hardest part, is that there's not a perfect answer for that there's not a perfect recipe.
The thing is that's so similar to having a baby, because as those of us who have had babies know, that when you first have a baby, you have no idea what you're doing. You're like, okay,
but you didn't get the manual. You didn't get the manual either.
No, exactly. Yeah. You're kind of like, you're overwhelmed. But so many people are trying to help you. Whether it's friends or neighbors or relatives
or your parents,
coworkers or your parents, they give you advice, free advice that sometimes you hate. But again, we all have different. Whether it's different financial situations, our babies have different personalities, we have different personalities. So everything is different. So there's no one answer to cure the gas or the burping or the
not sleeping through the
teething
night,
or not sleeping through the night, or everything that babies and then toddlers go through. And it's the same thing with aging parents. But the difference is that we love all that stuff with babies, because it's usually something good is going to come out of it. The baby's going to start sleeping through the night. They're going to relieve themselves of that gas and not cry anymore. Stuff like that, to where things are good. In this case, things are getting bad and only getting worse with your parents because they're aging. Their mental stuff or their physical stuff is getting worse. So people don't talk about it. And you don't have that community aspect, which is what is so, so valuable.
Yeah, no, I agree. So you guys decide, man, this is a little rough. So you take action. And what was your action?
We felt like that, as much as we felt prepared for some of the things, if we felt as overwhelmed as we did, even having a lot of that in line, we thought surely there are a lot of other people that don't even know how to prepare properly. So Mike had the idea actually several years ago, hey, what if we did, I think there's other people that are going through these issues. What if we created a private Facebook group just to bring people together? And at the time, I remember kind of thinking, well, that's kind of depressing, that's not really fun stuff to talk about, to be totally honest. as a former reporter, I love doing stories about, inspirational people and challenges that have been overcome and some of those things. And this was really hard because a lot of times there's not a victory at the end, as far as a challenge overcome and that kind of thing. And so, we kind of, went on about our lives. And frankly, we were pretty busy with our other business during the pandemic because we teach people how to be on camera. So that was pretty important during the pandemic. And then after Mike's parents, after the move, finally, in April of 2021, and Mike's mom was moved to memory care, what I noticed when he posted just one thing on social media about how tough it was, there were, of course, so many responses, but what I keyed in on was the fact that it wasn't just people who were empathetic, which of course they were.
Yeah.
It was more the people that responded, oh my gosh, I've been there. I'm in that right this minute, or I know it's coming. And so I turned to Mike and I just said, okay, you're right. People need to talk about this. And we hopefully have, skills that we can bring to this conversation to try and help people.
Yeah, because that's what we thought, is that rather than just open up a Facebook group and then say, have fun, talk amongst yourselves. We, as former TV newscasters, sportscasters, thought, okay, let's use our interviewing skills and interview experts, because that's what we needed at the time and still need it at various times about, whether it's legal stuff for will, power of attorney, et cetera. Maybe it's insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. Maybe it's medical stuff. Maybe it's just,
what's the difference between home care and home health care?
The different types of dementia,
right.
Anything like that. If we can talk to an expert, and there's not going to be one right answer for everyone, because again, everyone is different.
Right.
But if we can bring all those subjects out in the open and let people hear them and get some ideas, some tips about, oh, I do need to get a medical power of attorney, not just a durable power of attorney. So let me go to my attorney to get that done. It makes things a little bit easier to where you're more prepared for the winding road that we're having to navigate.
Even just the questions to ask, or the things to be thinking about, the things to make sure that about your parents.
I was actually shocked to find out. I don't know if this has changed. This was a couple of years ago. Okay. So I don't know. But the home health care that you were talking about is really an unregulated industry. It's kind of a free-for-all from what I understood. Has that changed any?
Well, I think the biggest difference first is to know that there's a difference between home care and home health care, which was something that it sounds similar.
Which is so confusing.
So what's the difference?
But what is different is that home care is more what they call activities of daily living, whether it's bathing, shower, bathing, getting dressed, feeding, some of the just sort of things that you do every day.
Daily stuff.
Home health care is more healthcare provided, and a lot of times that's something that may be covered by Medicare, where home care is not. So so that's where it gets tricky, is that people may assume, oh, if I get a home care service, they're going to be able to do these things, medical stuff for my parents, and that's not what they're designed to do. And so it's being sure that what kind of care do you need, and what care am I going to be getting, and frankly, who pays for it? Because there's certain parts of it that is completely out of pocket if it's home care. It's just designed as an assistance. Unless, and then it gets complicated because if you have a long-term care insurance or things, blah, 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 there's things.
So much confusion about it. It's like, if your parents move into an independent living place, then yes, they have to pay for it. They move into assisted living, then they have to pay for it, but it can be a write-off because it's medically necessary. So again, there are tax implications all over the place, insurance implications all over the place. It is so confusing. So you need to know who you should talk to, who you should ask the questions of, to make sure you have everything in line.
Yeah, it's not only confusing, it's a little scary. I mean, I remember when I flew back from my mom's surgery, she was in the hospital and they were getting ready to let her go. And of course, she's got, a wound because of the surgery. And I was actually surprised to find out that they were only going to send a nurse out there once after she got home for like the first cleaning. And I'm like thinking to myself, holy camole.
Right. We can teach you how to do it, right?
This is going to be up to my dad. Well, that was a scary part. I was thinking, because we similar bloodlines. I mean, that literally, we don't like blood. So I'm thinking to myself, there is no way. And so I pulled him out of the room, and we went down to a private area where we could talk. And I said, Dad, is this something you feel like you can do? Because if not, I mean, we'll try to figure out an alternative. But I mean, I was going to have to hop on a plane and go, but back home. I'm like, Dad, can you do it? And he said he would, and he did. But holy cow!
Yeah. A lot of times I think it is a situation where they just say, okay, we'll show you how to do it. And while some people are able to do that, other people are not, and so you have to sort of know what are the expectations, and what am I going to be expected to do, or what can be provided, and asking the questions to find out, is it possible for there to be somebody who comes more often than that or not? It's just, in a lot of times we just take that first answer sometimes and we think, oh, okay, maybe I'm just not understanding this right, or okay, we can figure it out. And so a lot of times it's knowing, how do I advocate for myself or my loved one so that I can make sure they get the care they need. But it just gets super overwhelming.
All the medical stuff is overwhelming because we have no control over it for the most part, other than, here, have an aspirin, that type of thing. Last August, my dad wasn't feeling too well. So my sister, because he lives about 3 hours away, my sister lives in the same town that he lives in, took him to his doctor. And the doctor checks him out and runs some tests and says, I think it's looking good. Let me look at the test. But
you've just been feeling tired.
Yeah, go on home. Well, about the time that they get home, the doctor calls my sister and says, get him to the emergency room now. He needs a pacemaker. Well, my sister's like, oh my gosh, picks up my dad, takes him to the emergency room. They tell the emergency room, doctor says he needs a pacemaker. Well, they're like, we don't have a cardiologist around today.
Because of COVID, we're crowded.
Yeah, we're crowded because of COVID. So we can either admit you or you can just go home. Well, they call me. I'm in the parking lot. It's the day before my birthday. I'm in the parking lot going to dinner with Kim and our 2 kids. And I'm on the phone with my dad. And my dad's like, yeah, I guess I'm going to go home because nothing I can do right now. It's like, Dad, are you kidding? Get admitted to the hospital. I do not want to wake up on my birthday and find out you passed away because you don't have a pacemaker yet and you're not being looked at. And he's like, okay, you're right. Okay, bye, son. Hangs up, looks at my sister and says, take me home. I'm like, really? And, sometimes, again, it's our parents. They're in their 70s or 80s or 90s, and they get a little stubborn. They can be selfish. They've had a great life, and they want to do it their way. And I still, to this day, hold it against my dad. Now, luckily, he went back to the hospital on my birthday. And on the 19th, the day after my birthday, he got a pacemaker, and he's feeling great now. But what I went through, as the child, the adult child, hearing my dad, hearing him being going through all the medical stuff, which I have no control over other than, please, Dad, please don't die. Don't leave the hospital. Okay, bye. Yeah. I'm leaving.
This sounds like a familiar conversation. Mom, I love you. Do not stop texting me health news. I've told you this. Right?
Exactly. What we tell people in our group is don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. It's not like my dad did that. It's like, I don't like Mike, so I'm going to tell him no, and I'm going home. It wasn't that. It's just, we have to understand what they're going through. It's not fun getting older. It's not fun watching our health deteriorate a little bit. It's not fun having our memory or whatever deteriorate a little bit. If we have dementia or Alzheimer's, like my mom does, like Kim's mom does, it's not fun for us in that way. And it's not fun for us to give up different things. When my sister and I convinced my dad, you don't need a house anymore. You live in independent living. Let's sell the house. He's like, I don't own anything if I do that. But Dad, you don't need to. You don't need to. But again, our aging parents, they were born in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Maybe they think of things differently than we do.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, owning a house means something. It's almost like a status symbol, even though I don't live there. So I hate to give it up. So we have to have a little grace and realize they're not doing these things to aggravate us. They're not doing these things just because they don't like us or they want to make our days worse. They're doing these things because of the way their brains are thinking, like, I don't really want to do that. I'd rather go home than stay at the hospital. Show some grace and don't take it personally.
Do you find a lot of that, like in the Facebook group where people are struggling with that whole?
Absolutely. Just so many challenges of either my parents don't want to talk about things that we know need to be talked about. my siblings and I aren't getting along, or we're not being able to make decisions cohesively, which can be so challenging and, detrimental to that relationship. So yeah, I think that so many people come to the group because they just feel like I need to vent. I need to share. I need to see that this is what I'm going through. And I think they're very often so relieved to find out that they're not the only ones going through something similar. And so it just can be that community aspect just makes you feel, it doesn't solve the problem necessarily, but it makes you feel supported. And often you find a little tip or idea or insight that from somebody else's experience that can certainly help you as something to try.
Along with the moral support.
Mm-hmm.
I have, you brought up the whole sibling thing. Now, fortunately, I have 2 younger brothers. We're on the same page, and we did get our parents into independent living. So that is like the weight of the world off my shoulders. Now, my brothers are back in my hometown. Everything would have gone okay. But just having that weight off of our shoulders is so incredible. But it also is less complicated for us. They've taken care of themselves from an insurance perspective. They've taken care of themselves from a legal perspective. So I'm just feeling, as good as I can at this point, but so many people, holy cow, if I had a nickel for every sibling story I'd heard because the parents didn't take care of things. So I say all that to say how, obviously there's a lot of different aspects to this. How do you guys enter in, bring in experts, or have you done that in your Facebook group or in the groups? How do you enter those in and find those quality experts that can help families?
Well, we actually just recently did an interview with a mediator who likes to call himself a peacemaker to try to help kind of talk about some of the ways that you can approach those tough conversations when you don't have agreement already, naturally, and you've got to try to figure out, what is their real hesitation, or what is their real goal here, and really listening. So I think that trying to figure out what is everybody's perspective and what's really maybe underneath that. But the challenge is that when you bring in family dynamics, personality traits, birth order, whatever, all of those different things can really create some challenges. And I think that people, we look for those experts that can help us know what are the questions to ask, what are the ways we can start conversations, what are the ways that we can bring up topics that are tough to talk about. We often in the Facebook group have people that will share that, my parents don't have a will and don't want to talk about it, and say it's not your business. And so how do you have those conversations to try to help them see that, just because we have a power of attorney doesn't mean that that gives us the authority today to start, selling your property and doing all that stuff, but helping them understand what that really means. And frankly, the gift that it is to the children when something does have to happen, or when something, when they need some help. Because what we always say is that, especially with the legal and the financial, if you wait until you need that, it's too late.
And part of the problem with communication is that, especially with our siblings, if you're not on the same page, like luckily you are, but if you're not on the same page, something just stews where you get frustrated, you get angry, and like, well, how come I'm doing everything? How come you're not doing anything? And you just think about it, and it gets frustrating, and it makes matters worse. And when you finally decide, well, let's talk about it. Well, all you do is talk, and it just spews out of your mouth and argue, and you don't listen. And that's what the person we talked to, our mediator, said. The biggest thing about communication is that you have to listen. So listen to the other side. When you have a brother or sister who lives halfway across the country and is complaining about the way things are being done, okay, well, listen to what they say. Don't just say, well, you're never here, I have to do everything, this is not fair. Well, don't do that. Right. Listen to them. And it doesn't mean that they're right. It doesn't mean you're right. You've got to meet in the middle and figure out what's best for both of you and for your parents.
Well, I'll tell you, I was just on a phone call with a guy yesterday, strangely enough, pure coincidence. And he was talking about his sibling, and their father's been passed away about a year ago, and they're still holding on to the house. She won't let it go. And he's like, we got to let it go. We got to let it go. And they're just holding on to it for no good reason other than that. I guess they operating under this assumption that they're going to make more money, but That's, you're really not going to make enough money to cover the fact that you're still holding on to those old emotions. And that's just a very difficult way to live. What is the most talked about? I'm curious about this. What is the most talked about? And I don't want to rehash old ground, but what is the most talked about topic that you guys run across?
I think housing. I think where they live is.
So I see. I nailed it.
I think it is. It is. I mean, the financial stuff is important, and some of the legal stuff is important because, again, wills. It's amazing that people don't have a will. To me,
yeah.
Power of attorney. I know it's tough because the parents often think, if I'm signing this power of attorney, then you're going to take over everything.
Right.
And that doesn't have to happen. It gives me a chance to take it over. If something happens eventually, you don't have to do it. It doesn't have to happen immediately.
Right.
You can hold on to it. The parent can hold on to it. And then when something bad happens, the kid can go and get it out of the safe or get it out of the closet and then start using it. But housing is so important because you have to talk ahead of time. And my sister and I got together and talked ahead of time about my mom and dad. It's like, yeah, we agree. They need to move into independent living. And then they bought a place, almost 30 years ago, about an hour outside of Dallas on 6 acres. And we started talking about, well, I really like this. Should we live there? I really like, do you live there? Yeah. We said no, because of our spouses, our families, and all the situations. I think it's best if we sell it. And we told our dad that. And our dad was, again, a little reluctant at first. I think he wanted it to stay in the family and be in his name so that he still had that ownership. But again, we talked about it ahead of time. It wasn't a case of where, okay, dad's on his deathbed. What should we do with the house?
Well, and I think even the housing of where they're going to live currently too, the questions of, hey, do you know of I'm looking for an assisted living in here, in this area, or I'm looking for an independent living, or do we need a memory care, or those kinds of things. And I think that those questions of the understanding the differences between them and what they can provide. But I think very often people are looking for recommendations of kinds of services that can help them, as well as specifics about, mom and dad don't want to leave the house. How can we bring people in to take care of them? Kind of
should they live with us?
Right.
Because that comes up. Some people have that financial situation, and some people, I'd say they resent it, but it's tough on them. Mom and dad are having to live with us now. And oh my gosh, mom gripes all the time about how messy things are around here. It's like, that drives me crazy. And we hear that all the time. So, well, yeah, I know you have to have that grace about them, but you also have to know that you plan ahead to figure out what's best for mom and dad. And if you have several siblings, well, we have 5 kids and we don't have room in our house. Well, we only have 1 kid, so I guess they can live with us. Decide it ahead of time, so it's not that last minute thing to where all of a sudden it's a crisis. Oh my gosh, where can mom and dad move? They've got to move tomorrow. Let's move right now.
Well,
that's why it gets so hard.
And with the baby boomer generation being where it's at, this is where planning is just so critical, because I mean, what we ran into, and I've seen this countless times, waiting lists. And the waiting list sometimes can sound really bad, like, oh, you're 45th on the waiting list. Now, you tend to move up pretty quickly. That's a dirty little secret. But when you hear like you're 45th on the waiting list, I mean, panic sets in. And then the other side, and this is just education, I think, I ran into this where there are different kinds of independent living. So you run into these co-ops and you run into, and I was like, you do what? I mean, I just like, it was all so like mush. I mean, I digested it pretty quickly, but just the breadth of stuff that's out there. And this is where, and I love my in-laws. Hey, Jim and Kathy, how are you? See, I just told her the other day, I might mention her on the air, but it would be organic. So it just happened. So now I'm going to have to reveal this.
That's right.
So, but I was talking with them and really encouraging them to investigate this stuff, because you really want it to happen when everybody's of sound mind and body, and you can move around and they can make the decision as best as possible. So I'm glad I got my mother-in-law on the podcast today. She'll be very pleased about that.
Because I think it's having those conversations before it's necessary. What would be your ideal situation? Would you like being in a place where you can play bingo every day, or play, cards, or that you have exercise classes on site, and all of that. So what would be their desire? Or do they really want to stay in home at their home no matter what? And they can afford potentially bringing in care, what would be their desire, and having them look at some of the things. And I think one of the things that Mike ran across was when he started having the conversation with his parents, or especially with his dad, about moving into independent living, he envisioned the nursing home that his father had lived in
back in the 80s,
back in the 80s,
his last couple of years of life.
Right. Which is a much different experience than living in an independent living, where there are activities and field trips and, all of that is available. And so I think it's helping them see what the options are, and hoping that they are open-minded. Interestingly, when my grandparents moved to Houston from DC years ago, they were in their early 90s, and they went from an apartment in DC to straight to an independent living community in the Houston area near my mom. And they found one that was one that's called a continuum of care. So it had levels of care, so that you started in independent living, but if you needed extra care, It was available. And so they just chose that. I mean, it was so easy. They just knew that this is the decision we're going to make, and this will make it easier for my mom and for her brother. So this is what we're going to do. And then it was interesting then when my mom started getting a little bit older, and I said, maybe we should start looking into this, because you're single, you're living in a house by yourself. And she got to the point where she couldn't drive after this eye surgery. And she was very adamant about, no way, I'm not going. And I thought, oh, great, this is going to be really interesting. And, as time progresses. And and even though she had seen her parents living in that, I think she must have still envisioned that they were older, even though they were a little bit older than she was at the time. But, that she just envisioned this like, oh, you need to do that when you're old. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, some different things happened to where her brother actually took her to see a place. And she decided, okay, like in one day she called, I called her, and
independent living.
Independent living. And I called her, I'd been out of town, and I said, oh, hey, I'm going to be coming in town. She said, oh, great, I can show you where I'm moving. And I said, oh, you're moving, are you? Really? Yeah. Interesting. You talked to my brother about this, right? And she said, oh no, I need to call him and tell him to, because I signed the contract today. And I said, you did. Great. Let's not sign legally binding documents in the future, preferably without you telling me or my brother
about it at least.
But fortunately, it ended up being her idea and her decision. And while it was still a little bit tough during that transition, because she, was like, oh gosh, is this the right decision? And maybe I don't want to do this. It was still her decision. Yeah. So I think, so all that to say, I think every situation is a little bit different. We actually both interviewed our parents about their move into independent living. And we have that on our website, which is kind of fun, that we got to ask them, sort of the process that they went through. And fortunately, both of our parents agreed and thought that was a good idea. Unfortunately, some parents don't think it's a great idea. So it's how do you have those conversations and really figure out their desires when it can be a choice and not a crisis.
And the scary part for us is seeing people in our group who say, mom and dad need to go somewhere, but they can't afford anything. Should I use my 401k to pay for my parents living in assisted living or independent living? It's like, oh my goodness, you're going to sacrifice, which is nice of you to sacrifice for your parents, but that means you're going to have nothing for you when you get to be that age.
And you're going to be doing the same thing to your kids. Yeah, it's really hard.
It's hard. Yeah. It's a tough situation.
I worry right now with the cost of everything. Now, we got really, really lucky because my parents made a decision a month prior to everything shutting down for COVID. Mm-hmm. And of course, what's happened since then, right, are the inflation costs of construction, and everything has gone through the roof. Mm. Had they waited another 40, 50 days, they might have already been priced out of the market just because of the elevated cost of construction and everything. So I can only imagine the additional stress that's putting on families right now that are trying to help their parents make those decisions, because I'll bet the place my parents bought just a couple of years ago is probably already gone up 30 or 40,000. And that's a lot for some seniors. I mean, that's a down payment for a lot of people that they might not be able to make. And that's scary.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. And knowing their financial situation is really important and helpful for you. Not that you need to know down to the penny or that you're trying to, figure out all of those things, but knowing, do they, because their Social Security is not probably very much. Do they have other forms of income as far as pensions or IRAs or 401ks or, things like that? Because knowing a little bit of an idea of what they're going to be able to afford also kind of not dictates necessarily, but helps inform some of those other decisions. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It plays a big part in it for sure. I mean, it always comes down to dollars and cents, right?
Yeah. And I think, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, is there something that we haven't touched on today as we begin to wrap up that you guys think's really important for people to know?
Well, I think the biggest thing is as an adult child is in some ways is giving yourself, as Mike mentioned, grace to your parent, but also a little bit of grace to yourself, because we haven't ever done this before. We haven't ever needed to know all the ins and outs of Medicare or Medicaid. We haven't needed to step in and help our parents with their medication, especially because that's something that they potentially did for us. So it's that role reversal is so challenging. And so being aware that it can be a little bit sad, frankly, as you're going through this, because you can't ask your parent for advice, perhaps in the same way that you used to when you were younger and they were younger, especially, it depends. Some, like my grandparents were sharp until the very end, where my mom has some cognitive dementia issues. And so, I can't ask her some of the advice that I might have in the past.
And it's a bummer.
It is a bummer. Yeah. So I think being aware that it's okay that you're feeling a little bit frustrated or sad, or you may potentially, especially in the case of Alzheimer's, like in Mike's family, you're kind of grieving as you go while they're still alive, which is really challenging too. So I think it's knowing that you're not alone, that there are others going through something similar, if not the same.
My biggest advice, and this is mainly for guys, not to be sexist about it, but for guys, because guys, I am one, so I know this.
Yeah, we need help.
Is that, well, is that we like to backseat drive, and we like to think, I got this. It's not a problem. And truthfully, in many, many ways, I felt that because my dad went over, even though he was so private about financial stuff as I was growing up, because he was an accountant. Financial stuff is a secret. But as I got older, he opened up more to me about how much he and my mom had and what they could afford. So I knew what they could afford. I had a will, I have a power of attorney, I have a medical directive. I have all that. Like, okay, this is great. I have a great communication and great relationship with mom and dad. We know about mom and Alzheimer's, and we know what's coming up. This is not going to be a problem at all. And then once you go through it yourself, completely different. All that stuff that I was telling you before about being so overwhelmed, you can't help it. It happened. Now, again, backseat driving, when you're just sitting there watching, like, that is easy. You got that, and then just do that, and just do that. Easier said than done. It took us, the moving my mom into memory care was about a 1.5 year process from when my sister and I first looked until she actually moved, because again, we had to look, we had to find a place. And once we found a place, we had to make sure that we could get a place, because at the time they were full. And then once we were able to finally not lock in, but okay, they have an opening. Dad, we need to figure out when we're going to move mom. Well, if dad wasn't in on it 100%, it wasn't going to work, because I know my dad, again, I love him, but he can be selfish. He was going to go get mom and bring her back. So dad had to be on board completely. Well, in October of 1 year, he was, this was 1.5 years ago, he was going to move. We were going to move her, and he said, "Whoa, no, let's wait till after the holidays, after Thanksgiving and Christmas, because that means so much to moms." Like, okay. So we waited, and we were going to do it in February. February the 8th, we were going to do it. And he calls me on February the 6th. I mean, everything is done. Everything is ready. I'm going to drive up in 2 days to help move her. And he calls me and says, executive decision, I'm going to put a stop to this. Like, what? Yeah, it means a lot to mom. Her birthday's coming up on the 22nd, and our anniversary's on the 27th. That's going to mean a lot to her. So let's wait. Like, oh, really, Dad? Finally on March the 8th of 2021, we moved her. But that's a long process to go through. A lot of emotional ups and downs. Yeah. But again, if you look at it from, stepping away and you're just backseat driving, you're like, oh, that's not a problem. Just get it done and do that and do this. It's not that easy when it's really your mom or dad And
No,
you're
listen,
going through that whole process. So just be ready and don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't feel alone. And it doesn't mean that someone's going to hold your hand and tell you exactly what to do, but to just kind of give you some tips, some advice, some words of wisdom, and mainly some moral support.
Well, speaking of which, tell everybody how they can, and we'll put this in the show notes. How can they get a hold of you? How can they find you? How can they get that advice?
The best place to go is just to our website, which is parentingagingparents.com. That's where we keep all of the interviews that we've done with experts. There are dozens there to choose from, whatever topic might be of interest to you at any given point. So that's a great place to be able to get the resources and the information, if you will. And there's also a button there that you can click on. It'll take you right to the Facebook group if you want to join. It is a private Facebook group so that it can be a little more private. And because people talk about a lot of tough stuff, we want it to be private, but you can just answer a few questions and join.
And of course, also a contact form on the website to reach out and ask us questions. We're happy to help. We are not the experts. We're just riding along with you. We're all in this together, is what we like to say. And if we can help you in any way, we can, but we want to try and point you in the right direction as you try to navigate these tough roads.
Yeah. And I would encourage everybody, go out and check out this website, because you need to be informed, because these decisions, they're challenging. I've been there, done that. And I think at one point my dad said, "You're trying to kick me out of my house." I think I got that one, but they've come around. They really love where they're at, but you know how that goes. I mean, that's just part of the process. And you have to be, here's my 2 cents. You have to be prepared for that, right? Because that's coming at you. You're gonna get a little pain, but
absolutely.
But at least for me, it was worth it in the end to know that they're taking care of it in a good place.
Yeah, it makes you feel better.
Well, Mike and Kim, thank you for coming on the True Man podcast. We really appreciate you giving this information. I think it's needed, and people need to know where they can go get good quality information, because Google's not always accurate. They're going to shut down my podcast now.
And just to support this, so you're not alone.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate you being on the show.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
You bet.